Okay, in this video we're going to be discussing what is actually meant by a monopoly, why do monopolies exist and why do the governments like some monopolies to exist, what's meant by a natural monopoly and what is meant by the terms of economy. So a monopoly is just when there's one sole seller of a product. The product doesn't have a close substitute and there's only one provider. Producers are price makers. Okay, they can control the price they charge. They can't charge whatever price they want. Don't say that. But they can control the price by manipulating their output, and they can raise their prices, and it might not have a massive impact on demand because it's quite inelastic and there are no substitutes. And producers' sovereignty dictates what is produced. Producers will only produce more if it's going in their best interest to maximise their profits. Okay? They won't always provide what society wants, and they won't always maximise consumers' welfare. And there's high barriers to entry to make it harder for new entrants to enter the market. Okay, it's very, very hard to enter these markets. So just quickly, a monopoly is a market structure where there's only one producer-seller for a product. Entry into such a market is restricted due to high costs or other impediments. Sometimes the government wants to create their own monopoly, so they've done that with the electricity industry in the past, they've done that with Australia Post in Australia, and the reason for that is often because it's hard to enter the market because one firm has exclusive rights to the natural resources needed to make that product. So we'll talk about one example with Telstra in a second. And another example is Saudi Arabia has sole control over the oil, so the government produces all the oil in that country. Reasons for higher barriers to entry. These are some key reasons why monopolists continue to be monopolists. So the first one is the monopolist owning the key resources. So basically what happened initially in Australia is Telstra owned all the cables, all the infrastructure that was needed to provide telecommunications. So because they owned all the infrastructure, because they owned all the cables, they had a monopoly in that industry. And it's the same with the National Broadband Network. The government is trying to give this company called NBN Co. to be the sole provider of fast broadband. So they'll sell it on to the different retailers, but they'll be the only one that actually produces fast broadband. The next one, and this is a really key one, monopolists often exist because they've been given exclusive right to produce the product. So that is what we mean. If I come up with this new idea, this creative idea, if I come up with this product that I want to sell, that's innovative, that I think is going to make a lot of money, then I have exclusive rights to making that product. Nobody can just copy my idea and do the same thing. So it's very common in the music industry. If I sing a song, I have exclusive rights to the profits from those lyrics. Okay? And if anyone tries to copy them, there are massive copyrights and patents that exist to stop people from selling exactly the same song. Because I deserve the profits from that, because I came up with the song, it was my idea, and if we just let people copy those, then it's going to prevent innovation. It's going to prevent people from being entrepreneurial. So sometimes the government will give the monopolists exclusive rights to a product, purely based on the fact to encourage research and development, to encourage innovation. And that's common in the musical industry when we sing songs. It's common in the pharmaceutical industries. So if I come up with a new drug, no one's allowed to make a generic brand of that drug for 7 years. I get exclusive rights to the profits from that drug. Microsoft also had a monopoly in Windows operating systems in the past. So you can't basically just stop people from copying ideas. So examples of exclusive rights, Microsoft having exclusive rights to produce Windows operating systems. As I said, pharmaceutical companies, 7 years to sell drugs. Musicians are monopolists of their own work. We can't just copy their work and sell the same thing. Okay? Otherwise, why would you want to become a musician? Economies of scale is the biggest barrier to entry into monopolists. It's the main reason why monopolists exist. Okay, so what is economies of scale? Basically, it's when it is more efficient to have one producer instead of lots of producers. So if a single firm can supply goods and services to the market than 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 could, then we're better off having one market. Okay, and the definition of economies of scale. It occurs when the average costs of production for businesses fall with larger levels of output. Fixed costs of production are able to be spread over a larger level of output. What I mean by fixed costs, they're the costs that don't go up regardless of how much we sell. So here's basically a table, I'll flick back to this in a sec, of car production. So if I start up my own car yard, I might have $50,000 worth of fixed cost, or in this case $50 million. So it might cost me $50 million to buy all the machines, all the infrastructure to set up my car yard. So if I sell one car, I'm going to have total costs of 50 million fixed costs and 5,000 in variable costs. So my total cost would be 50 million and 5,000 if I could write the right thing in that column. So it's going to cost me 50 million and 5,000 per car. I'm not going to be able to make much money. Okay, I'm not going to be able to cover the costs of all my machinery, all my infrastructure if I just sell one car. When I talk about the variable costs, I'm talking about things like the steel, the wheels, the engine that goes into each individual car. If I sell 2 cars, they're going to cost me 25 million and 5,000 per car. Once I start selling 10 cars, 5 million a car. Okay, once I go up to 1,000 cars, I'm starting to reduce my cost per car because I'm spreading these fixed costs, these 50 million in fixed costs, over a greater volume of output. Once I start making 100,000 cars, bang, it's only costing me 5,500 a car because that 50 million here is being spread over 100,000 units. And that's why it's really cheap for countries like China to make cars, because they're producing on such a grand scale, they can spread those fixed costs over a greater level of output. And that's what economies of scale is. So it would be inefficient to have lots of little providers of things like mail services in Australia. Better off having one provider that can have all the infrastructure, they can have big trucks, and it will be cheaper for them to provide on a grander scale. Having lots of little trucks will not be efficient for the market. Okay, so back to this last one. Natural monopolies exist when in industry where it is more efficient, we're going to have lower fixed cost per unit if one single firm produces to the market rather than multiple firms, because fixed costs can be spread over a greater volume of output. Okay? I wouldn't be able to, imagine if I tried to sell 5 or 6 letters, started up my own business and tried to compete against Australia Post. There'd be no way that I could get 10 letters or 20 letters to Queensland at a price of 50 cents or $1 a letter. Okay? We can't compete with these industries unless we have economies of scale. Okay? And that's basically just a graph showing the fixed costs per unit. The more we produce, the fixed costs per unit start to fall, and therefore it is cheaper to produce more. You don't need to know this minimum efficient scale, but basically what that means is with this blue line is where it's cheapest per unit to produce the product. Thanks for listening.